Page 310. The case of Ruskia Vedomosti. In this case, one of the earliest free speech was on trial. On March 24, 1918, this famous professorial newspaper published an article by Savinkov entitled "Un-uprooted." They would have much preferred to arrest Savinkov himself, but he really was en route, damn it, and where was he to be found? So instead, they closed down the paper and brought the elderly editor, P.V. Yegorov, to court as a defendant, insisting that he explain how he dared to publish the article. After all, the new era was only 4 months old, and it was time to get used to it. Yegorov naively defended himself by saying that the article had been written by a leading political figure whose opinion was of general interest whether or not the editor shared it. Furthermore, he saw nothing slanderous in Savinkov's having said, "Let us not forget that Lenin, Nitsan, and co. arrived in Russia via Berlin, i.e. that the German authorities helped them return to the homeland, because that, in actual fact, was what had happened. Kaiser Wilhelm's embattled Germany had helped Comrade Lenin to return." Krylenko retorted that he would not conduct a prosecution for slander. Why not? And that the newspaper was on trial for attempting to influence people's minds. And how could any newspaper dare to have such a purpose? The formal charge did not include Savinkov's phrase, quote, "One has to be criminally insane to affirm seriously that the international proletariat will come to our aid," unquote, because it still would come to our aid. For attempting to influence people's minds, the newspaper, which had been published since 1864 and had survived the most fiercely reactionary periods, those of Lori Melikov, Papadonov, Stolypin, Castle, and all the rest, was ordered closed down forever. And Yegorov, the editor, and this is a shameful thing to have to say, was given only 3 months of solitary, just as though we were in Greece or some such place. It is not so shamefully lenient, however, if one stops to think that it was only 1918. If the old man had managed to survive, he would be imprisoned again, and many more times too. Yeah, or purged. It may seem strange to us now, but it is a fact that in those thunderous years, bribes were given and taken just as tenderly as they had been from the time immemorial in old Russia, and they will be in the Soviet Union from here to eternity. And everywhere. Bribery was particularly rife in the judicial organs, and, though we blush to say it, in the Cheka, the official histories in their red, gold-stamped bindings are silent about this, but the old folks and eyewitnesses remember that the fate of political prisoners in the first years of the revolution, as distinct from Stalinist times, often depended on bribes. They were accepted uninhibitedly, and prisoners were honestly released as a result. Although Krylenko picked out only a dozen cases for the 5-year period in his book, that his book covers, he reports 2 cases of bribery. Alas, even the Moscow Tribunal and the Supreme Tribunal squeezed their way through to perfection along a crooked path, muddied themselves in improprieties. B. The case of the 3 interrogators of the Moscow Rev Tribunal, April 1918. In March 1918, a spectacular in gold bars named Beridze was arrested. A speculator in gold bars. His wife tried to find a way to ransom her husband, which was the accepted thing to do. Through a series of connections, she succeeded in getting to one of the interrogators, who brought two others in with him. Meeting secretly, they demanded a bribe of 250,000 rubles, but after some bargaining, they reduced it to 60,000, half in advance. The deal was to be made through the lawyer Grin. Everything would have gone off without a fuss, as hundreds of similar deals had, and the case would have gotten into neither Krelenko's chronicle nor ours, nor even become a matter of concern to the Council of People's Commissars, had it not been that Barize's wife began to get miserly and brought Grin only 15,000 as an advance payment. Instead of 30,000. But the main thing was that, in consequence of female fickleness, she changed her mind overnight, decided her lawyer wasn't good enough for her, and went off the next morning to find another, the attorney Gulag. It's not stated anywhere, but it was evidently Gulag who decided to turn in the interrogators. It is of interest that all the witnesses in this trial, beginning with the unfortunate wife, tried to give testimony helpful to the accused and to befuddle the prosecution, which would have been impossible in a political trial. Krelenko explained their conduct as a result of a narrow-minded Philistine attitude because they felt like outsiders, as far as the Rev Tribunal was concerned. And might we ourselves be so audacious as to advance the Philistine hypothesis that in the course of a year and a half, witnesses have already learned to be afraid of the dictatorship of the proletariat? After all, it took a lot of nerve to turn in the interrogators of the Rev Tribunal. What would happen to you after that? The accuser's line of argument is also of interest. After all, just a month earlier, the defendants had been associates, his comrades in arms, his assistants. They were people who had been inalienably dedicated to the interests of the revolution, and one of them, Leist, was even a stern accuser capable of hurling thunder and lightning at anyone who attacked the foundations, unquote. What was he to say about them now? Where was he to look for the cause of their fall? A bribe was not enough in itself, and of course, it is clear where he looked, in their pasts, in their biographies. Declared Krelenko, quote, "If we look closely at the Leist, quote, we will find highly interesting information," unquote. This is intriguing. Was he an inveterate adventurer? No, but he was the son of a professor at Moscow University, and not an ordinary professor, but one who had survived 20 years of reaction by his indifference to political activity, and who, notwithstanding that reaction, had been accepted by Krelenko as a consultant. Was it surprising, then, that the son turned out to be a double dealer? As for Podgaitsky, he was the son of an official in the law courts, beyond doubt one of the reactionary pogrom organizing Black Hundreds. Otherwise, how could he have served the Tsar for 20 years? And the son, too, had prepared for a career in the law of courts. But then the revolution had come, and he had wormed his way into the Rev Tribunal. Just yesterday, all this had been depicted in a very favorable light, but it had suddenly become repulsive. More repulsive than both of them was, of course, Gulag. He had been a publisher, and what intellectual food he had been offered the workers and peasants. He was, quote, nourishing the broad masses with low-quality literature, unquote. Not Marx, but instead books by bourgeois professors with world-famous names. And we shall soon encounter these professors as defendants, too. Krelenko is enraged and marvels at the kind of people who would have sneaked into the tribunal. Neither do we understand. What kind of people are the workers and peasants tribunals composed of? Why had the proletariat entrusted the task of striking down their enemies to people of that particular kind? Of this particular kind. And as for Grin, the lawyer, a man with on the investigating commission, who was quite able to get anybody off scot-free, he was a typical representative of that subspecies of the human race which Marx called leeches on a capitalist structure, a category including, in addition, all lawyers, gendarmes, priests, and also notaries. It appears that Krylenko spared no effort in demanding mercilessly severe sentences without reference to the individual shadings of guilt. Quote, but some kind of lethargy, some sort of torpor, overcame the externally vigorous tribunal, and it just barely managed to mumble 6 months in jail for the interrogators and a fine for the lawyer. And only by availing himself of the authority of the All-Russian Central Executive Committee to punish without limitation did Krylenko there in Metropole continue to hang 10-year sentences on the interrogators and 5 on the lawyer, plus full confiscation of its property. Krylenko thundered on about vigilance, and he almost managed, but not quite, to get the title of tribune he so coveted. We recognized that among the revolutionary masses at the time, as among our readers today, this unfortunate trial could not but undermine the faith in the sanctity of the tribunal, and we therefore proceed with even greater timidity to the next case, which concerned an even loftier institution. Case C, the case of Kosarev, February 15, 1919. F.M. Kosarev and his pals Libert, Rottenberg, Soloviev had first served on a commission for supply of the Eastern Front. Back before Kolchak, when the enemy forces were the armies of the Constituent Assembly, it was discovered that they had found ways to siphon into their own pockets from 70,000 to 1,000,000 rubles at a time. They rode around on fine horses and engaged in orgies with the nurses. Their commission had acquired a house and an automobile, and their major domo lived it up in the Yar restaurant. We aren't accustomed to picturing 1918 in this light, but all this was in the testimony of the Rev Tribunal. But none of this, to be sure, was the case against them. No charge had been brought against any of them in connection with their activities on the Eastern Front. They had even been forgiven all that. But wonder of all wonders, hardly had their commission for supply been disbanded than all 4 of them, with the addition of Nazarenko, a former Siberian tramp and convict pal of Kosarev in criminal hard labor, were invited to constitute the Control and Auditing Collegium of the VCHK, the Cheka. Here's what this collegium was. It had plenipotentiary powers to verify the legality of the actions of all remaining organs of the Cheka, the right to demand and review any case at any stage of its processing, and to reverse the decisions of all remaining organs of the VCHK, excepting only the Presidium of the Cheka. This was no small thing. The Collegium was second in command in the Cheka after the Presidium himself. It ranked immediately below Dzerzhinsky, Uritsky, Peters, Lassie, Menchinsky, Yagoda. The way of life of this comradely group remained just what it had been before. They didn't get swelled heads. They didn't get carried away with certain individuals named Maximich, Lenka, Rafaelsky, and Mariupolsky, who had no connection at all with the Communist Party, unquote. They set up in private apartments and the Hotel Savoy, quote, lavish establishments where game cards with table stakes as high as 1,000 rubles a throw were the order of the day, along with heavy drinking and women, unquote. Kosyrev acquired a rich establishment of his own, costing 70,000 rubles, and in fact, did not even draw the line at hauling off silver spoons and goblets, and even ordinary glassware from the Cheka. And how did all these objects get to the Cheka? And this is where the attention was concentrated, rather than in the direction of ideas and ideology. This was what he took from the revolutionary movement, unquote. In the very act of repudiating the bribes he had accepted, this leading Chekist, without blinking, volunteered the lie that he possessed 200,000 rubles from an inheritance in a Chicago bank. Evidently, as far as he was concerned, there was no conflict between such a circumstance and world revolution. Now, how did he propose to make proper use of his superhuman right to arrest anyone at all and release anyone at all? Clearly, one had to find a fish with a gold roe. And in 1918, there were not a few such fish in the nets. After all, the revolution had been carried out too quickly. They hadn't found everything. How many precious stones, necklaces, bracelets, rings, and earrings the bourgeois ladies had managed to hide away. Then one had to make contact with relatives of those who had been arrested through some reliable middleman. Such characters also passed before us at the trial. There was Uspinskaya, a woman of 22. She had graduated from the St. Petersburg gymnasium, but hadn't gone on to university. The Soviets had come to power, and so in the spring of 1918, Uspinskaya appeared at the Cheka to offer her services as an informer. She qualified on the basis of her appearance, and they accepted her. Krylenko had this to say about informing, which in those days had a different label. Quote, for ourselves, we see nothing shameful in it. We consider this to be our duty. The work itself is not disgraceful. Once a person admits that this work is necessary in the interests of the revolution, then he must do it, unquote. But alas, it turned out that Uspinskaya had no political credo. That's what was awful. She declared, quote, I agreed in order to be paid a fixed percentage, unquote, on the cases which turned up, and beyond that, quote, to split 50-50, unquote, with someone else, whom the court protected and instructed her not to identify. Krylenko put it in his own words, quote, Uspinskaya was not a staff member of the Cheka, but worked at piece rates, unquote. And incidentally, the accuser, understanding her in a very human way, explains that she had grown used to having plenty of money, and that her insignificant salary of 500 rubles from the Supreme Council of the Economy was nothing at all, considering that one exercise in extortion, for example, helping a merchant get the seal removed from his store, would net her 5,000 rubles, and another from Mensherskaya, Grev's wife of the prisoner, would bring in 17,000. For that matter, Uspinskaya served only briefly as a mere stool pigeon, thanks to the help of certain big Chekists. In a few months, she became a member of the Communist Party and an interrogator. However, we don't seem to be getting the essence of the case. Uspinskaya had arranged a meeting between this Mensherskaya Grevs and a certain Godiluk, a bosom pal of Kosyrev, in order to reach an agreement on her husband's ransom. They had initially demanded 600,000 rubles, but unfortunately, by some still unexplained means, the arrangements for that secret meeting became known to the same attorney, Yakovlov, who had already done in the 3 bribe-taking interrogators and who evidently felt class hatred for the whole proletarian system of judicial and extrajudicial processing. Wow, this is a mouthful sometimes. Yakovlev denounced them to the Moscow Reb Tribunal, and the presiding judge of the tribunal, recalling perhaps the wrath of the Council of People's Commissars in connection with the three interrogators, also blundered in terms of class premises. Excuse me. Instead of simply warning Comrade Dzerzhinsky and working it all out with the family, he hid a stenographer behind the curtain, and the stenographer took down all Gulag references to Kosarev and to Soloviev and to other commissars, and all his stories about who in the Cheka takes how many thousands. Then, as per the stenographic record, Gulag received an advance payment of 12,000 rubles, and Mensherskaya Grebs was given a pass to enter the Cheka that had already been filled out by the Control and Auditing Collegium, by Lieber and Rottenberg. The bargaining was to continue there inside the Cheka, and there, Gulag was caught. In his confusion, he gave testimony against them, and Meshcherskaya Grebs had already gotten to the Control and Auditing Collegium, and they had already ordered her husband's case transferred there for verification. But just a moment. After all, an expose like this sullies the heavily blue uniforms of the Cheka. Was the presiding judge of the Moscow Rep Tribunal in his right mind? Well, was he really tending to his own business? But it turns out that was the nature of the moment, a moment totally hidden from us in the folds of our majestic history. It seems that the Cheka's first year of work had produced some somewhat repellent impression, even on the party of the proletariat, which still hadn't gotten used to it. Only its first year had passed. The Cheka had taken only the first step on its glorious path, and already, as Krylenko writes, although not very clearly, a dispute had arisen, quote, between the court and its functions and the extrajudicial functions of the Cheka, a dispute which, at the time, split the party and the workers' district into two camps, unquote. And that is how Kosarev case could come up, how the Kosarev case could come up, whereas everything had gone smoothly before, and reached all the way up to the topmost level of the whole state apparatus. And we'll take a break there because I can't talk anymore. Thank you for listening.